The jungle of Thalax 7 was a living, breathing thing, pulsing with the sounds of insects, rustling leaves, and the distant, unnerving calls of unseen predators. Dex Torin had been here long enough to block out the noise, focusing instead on the crunch of his boots through the thick undergrowth. His pulse rifle hung heavy on his shoulder, and sweat slicked his brow. Even so, he kept moving, eyes constantly scanning the trees for danger. Routine survey, Dex muttered, wiping his forehead with a grimace. Just scout the area, tag a few things for the guild. Easy job. Yeah, right. He'd been trekking through this humid nightmare for hours, ever since his small craft touched down in a clearing a few clicks back. The Galactic Hunters Guild had sent him to Thalax 7 with the usual vague instructions: explore the planet, identify potential threats, maybe bag a local predator or two. Standard enough on paper. But nothing about Thalax 7 was standard. The jungle felt alive, like it was watching him. He couldn't shake the tension, the sense that every step brought him deeper into some ancient, hostile territory. The creatures here were bigger, meaner, and hungrier than anything he'd encountered before. Even for a seasoned hunter like Dex, Thalax 7 felt different. Dangerous. His hand drifted to the small tracking device on his belt, the one tied into the guild's network. Supposedly, it scanned for anything larger than a human within a certain radius. So far, it hadn't picked up a thing, but Dex had long since learned not to trust his gear too much. Then he heard it. A deep, resonating growl rolled through the trees ahead. Not the usual calls of the jungle's many predators, this was something else. Deeper, more powerful. The sound vibrated through the ground beneath him, making the leaves tremble. Dex's heart kicked up a notch, but he didn't hesitate. He crouched low, moving cautiously toward the source of the noise. The jungle's ambient noise faded into the background as he tightened his grip on his rifle, carefully pushing through a tangle of vines. The growl came again, this time more like a pained rumble. Dex squinted through the dense trees, finally catching sight of something massive slumped against a fallen tree in the clearing ahead. He edged closer, keeping his steps light. It was a bear, or at least something resembling one. Bigger than any creature he'd seen, the size of a small transport truck. Its dark fur had an unnatural metallic sheen, like it was part armor. Its face was broad and long, with two massive tusks curving upward from its lower jaw. 4 glowing amber eyes, half-lidded with exhaustion, stared out from beneath thick fur. But what caught Dex's attention was the blood. Dark, thick pools of it oozed from deep gashes along the creature's side, exposing muscle and bone. It was breathing heavily, each exhale rumbling like distant thunder. Dex whispered, eyes wide. He'd heard stories about the wildlife on Thalax 7, but seeing it up close was something else entirely. And whatever had attacked this bear had been bigger, or just as dangerous. Instinct told him to back away, get to his ship, and report the sighting. No sense sticking around. But as Dex watched the bear's labored breathing, something gnawed at him. It wasn't just a predator, it was wounded, fighting to stay alive. He couldn't leave it. All right, Dex, he muttered under his breath, running a hand over his face. First things first, you're not doing this out here. The creature stirred slightly, one massive paw twitching in the dirt, but it didn't move. The thing was on the edge. If he tried patching it up here, in the open, he'd either get mauled or attract something worse. No, he'd need his gear tools, medicine, and a plan. It took Dex nearly half an hour to hike back to his camp, a small ridge clearing where he'd set up his base. His ship, the Sundog, sat nestled between trees, its hull gleaming with moisture from the jungle's heavy air. The camp wasn't much a portable tent, some crates and basic supplies. But it had what he needed. Dex rummaged through the gear, pulling out a small med kit, a vial of regenerating serum, and a portable med scanner. He grabbed a tranq dart too, no sense getting swatted by a creature that size if it woke up grumpy. After double-checking his supplies, Dex paused at the edge of camp, staring out into the dense jungle. All right, big guy, he muttered, slinging the gear over his shoulder. Let's see if you're in the mood for a rescue. By the time Dex made it back to the clearing, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the jungle floor. The bear hadn't moved much, still slumped against the fallen tree, its breath slow but steady. The sight of the dark blood pooling beneath the creature made Dex wince. Whatever had attacked it had done serious damage. If he didn't act fast, it wouldn't survive the night. Keeping low, Dex approached cautiously. He stopped a few feet away, scanning the creature's wounds with the med scanner. The device beeped softly as it processed the injuries. The results flashed on the screen: deep tissue damage, internal bleeding. The serum might stabilize the worst of it, but only if the bear didn't tear him apart first. Dex swallowed and glanced up at the creature. Its glowing eyes flicked open, watching him with a mixture of weariness and pain. The bear huffed, a low growl rumbling in its throat. Dex raised his hands, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Easy, big guy," he said softly, as though speaking to a wounded dog. "Let's get you patched up." He drew the vial of serum from his kit and fitted it into the injector. The serum was designed for rapid healing in large organisms, but given the bear's size, Dex wasn't sure if it'd be enough. Still, it was better than nothing. He approached slowly, keeping his eyes locked on the bear's. Its amber eyes flickered, following his every movement, but it made no attempt to rise. Dex crouched beside the creature and gently pressed the injector against its side. The serum hissed as it entered the bear's bloodstream. The creature flinched, a low growl escaping its throat. "Yeah, I know," Dex muttered, backing up a step, his heart pounding. "Stings, doesn't it?" For a long moment, nothing happened. The bear remained slumped, its breathing labored, and Dex wondered if the serum would even work. But then, slowly, the bear's breaths began to steady. The bleeding slowed, and the worst of the gashes started to close, the flesh knitting itself together. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it was enough to keep the creature from slipping into shock. Dex let out a long breath, the tension easing from his shoulders. "You're welcome," he said, half expecting the bear to swipe at him now that it had some strength back. But instead, the creature remained where it was, watching him with those bright, intelligent eyes. The jungle around them seemed to pause, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. Dex didn't dare relax completely, but for the moment, it seemed like the immediate danger had passed. He sat down on a nearby rock, wiping the sweat from his brow. The massive bear still looked like a monster, even in its weakened state, but there was something different in the way it regarded him now. Maybe it understood that Dex wasn't a threat, or maybe it was just too exhausted to care. Either way, Dex wasn't leaving just yet. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just an injured predator. Something had attacked the bear, something with enough power to wound the deadliest creature on this planet. And that meant Dex's job had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Dex sat there for a while, the quiet of the jungle settling in around him. The creature's eyes remained on him, no longer filled with the primal rage he expected from a predator of its size. Instead, its gaze held something else: exhaustion, maybe even recognition. The serum had done its job, starting to close the worst of the wounds, but the bear was still weak. "Someone's really out to get you," Dex muttered, glancing at the deep claw marks that crisscrossed the clearing. Trees had been splintered, and the ground was churned up like two titans had collided here. Dex couldn't help but feel like a smaller creature in this cosmic game. The idea of leaving the bear behind nagged at him. Smart thing to do, he knew that. Get back to the ship, call in the guild, report the situation. That's what he'd been trained for. But something kept him tethered, maybe curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe both. The bear stirred, letting out a low rumble as it tried to push itself up. Dex stepped forward instinctively, hands raised. "Easy there, big guy," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're not going anywhere until I'm sure you're patched up enough to handle yourself out there." The bear huffed, lowering its head slightly, a gust of warm air stirring the dirt at Dex's feet. That could have been a warning or exhaustion. Either way, it wasn't an attack. Dex backed up, giving the creature space. It wasn't ready to move, and truth be told, neither was he. Whatever had come after the bear was still out there, waiting. He hadn't seen any sign of the attacker yet, no blood trail leading away, no bodies. That left him uneasy. He reached for his comms device, clicking it on. "Sundog, come in," he said, hoping for a stable connection through the thick jungle canopy. There was a crackle of static before a voice finally cut through. "Dex, you alive down there?" Barely, Dex replied, keeping one eye on the bear. "Ran into something big. Real big. I've got a situation." There was a pause before his partner, Roan, answered, her voice tinged with concern. Define situation. I've got one of the locals a bear, I think, but not like anything we've seen before. It's been badly wounded, and I think something's still hunting it. Dex squinted into the trees again, his pulse quickening. I patched it up, but it's not going anywhere fast. Whatever attacked it, I don't think it's far off. Roan sighed through the comms. So you decided to play nurse to a 2-ton alien predator that could rip your head off, and now you think there's something worse out there. Pretty much sums it up, yeah, Dex said, tucking the comm back into his belt. I need to figure out what did this. If something's gunning for a creature this size, we've got bigger problems than just the locals. Before Dex could think any further, the bear growled again, its massive body shifting as it tried to rise. This time it managed to lift itself onto all fours slowly, shakily, but standing. The ground trembled beneath its weight, and it let out a low rumble as it shook itself, sending bits of dirt and debris flying. Whoa, easy, Dex said, backing up a step. The bear swayed slightly but steadied itself, its glowing amber eyes locked onto him. Then something odd happened. It lowered its head slightly, almost like a gesture of acknowledgement. Dex froze, unsure how to interpret the movement. Was it showing gratitude, deference, or was it sizing him up before making a move? You better not be luring me into a false sense of security, Dex muttered, his pulse quickening. But the bear didn't lunge or growl. Instead, it turned its massive head, fixing its gaze on the tree line. A low, guttural growl escaped its throat, this one filled with fresh tension. Dex followed its gaze and instantly felt his stomach drop. In the shadows of the jungle, something was moving, something large. He could barely make out the shape through the dense foliage, but whatever it was even bigger than the bear. Ah, hell, Dex whispered, tightening his grip on his pulse rifle. The bear stepped forward, its muscles tensed, growling low in its throat. Whatever was coming wasn't a casual wanderer, it was hunting them. The creature emerged from the jungle slowly, its monstrous form sending a wave of dread through Dex. It was a massive reptilian beast, its scales shimmering in the faint light like polished stone. Its eyes glowed a malevolent red, and its mouth was filled with rows of jagged, serrated teeth perfect for tearing through flesh and bone. Its body, long and serpentine, slithered with an unnerving grace, supported by thick, muscular legs that ended in razor-sharp claws. That's what did this to you, isn't it? Dex muttered to the bear, which responded with a furious snarl. The bear lumbered forward, positioning itself between Dex and the reptile, like it was instinctively protecting him. Well, this is new, Dex said, flicking the safety off his rifle. Not sure if I should be flattered or terrified. The reptilian creature hissed, its body coiling like a serpent, muscles rippling beneath its armored scales. It wasn't just here to finish off the bear, it was sizing both of them up, as if deciding which one to kill first. Before Dex could react, the reptile lunged forward, moving faster than anything that size should have been able to. The bear roared in response, charging headlong into the beast. Dex dove to the side just as the two titanic creatures collided, the impact sending a shockwave through the clearing. The reptile snapped its jaws, trying to clamp down on the bear's throat, but the bear was ready. With a savage swipe, it raked its massive claws across the reptile's face, sending it skidding back across the dirt. The bear growled low, its eyes blazing with renewed energy, despite still being visibly weakened from its earlier injuries. Dex scrambled to his feet, pulse rifle raised. He fired several rounds, the rifle kicking against his shoulder as energy bolts slammed into the creature's side. The reptilian beast roared in pain, but the shots barely slowed it down. Of course, Dex muttered under his breath. Why would it be that easy? The reptile slithered toward him, rage burning in its glowing red eyes. Its body undulated with terrifying speed, and for a moment Dex was sure it was about to tear him apart. But before it could close the distance, the bear was on it again, sinking its teeth into the creature's thick neck. Blood spurted from the wound, dark and viscous, as the reptile screeched in agony. Dex saw his chance. He sprinted toward the fallen tree, clambering up onto its trunk to get a better vantage point. From there he could see the reptilian beast thrashing beneath the bear's weight, its claws scraping furiously at the dirt in a desperate attempt to break free. Dex lined up his shot, aiming for the creature's exposed underbelly. He squeezed the trigger, and the pulse rifle fired a concentrated blast straight into the reptile's stomach. The shot tore through its scales, sending a shower of blood and scales into the air. The reptile convulsed violently, letting out a final, ear-piercing screech before collapsing. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the bear's ragged breathing. Dex remained perched on the fallen tree, his rifle still trained on the now lifeless body of the reptilian beast. The bear, panting heavily, lifted its head, blood dripping from its maw. It staggered slightly but managed to stay on its feet. They locked eyes for a long moment, neither of them moving. "Well," Dex finally said, lowering his rifle, "guess we make a pretty good team." The bear snorted softly, and for a fleeting moment, Dex could have sworn it looked almost amused. Then, with a heavy thud, the creature slumped back onto its haunches, clearly spent from the fight. Dex hopped down from the tree, cautiously approaching the bear once again. This time, the creature watched him with weary eyes but made no move to attack. Instead, it let out a long, tired huff, its eyes half-lidded as it slumped further into the dirt. "You earned the rest," big guy Dex said, giving it a wide berth as he knelt down to retrieve his medkit again. The bear didn't resist as Dex moved closer, applying more of the serum to the fresh injuries it had sustained in the fight. Once the worst of the wounds were sealed, Dex sat back on his heels, staring at the bear in quiet awe. He still couldn't fully comprehend why he'd done it, risked his life to help this alien creature rather than finishing the job and calling it in to the guild. Maybe it was because something about the bear seemed different, or maybe it was because against all odds, the two of them had just fought side by side to take down a threat bigger than either of them. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear: Dex wasn't leaving this planet alone. He stood up, shouldering his rifle, and glanced toward the jungle. There was more going on here than just dangerous wildlife. Someone or something had sent that reptile after the bear. There were questions that needed answering, and Dex wasn't the type to walk away from a mystery. "Looks like you're stuck with me for a bit longer," Dex said, glancing down at the bear, which huffed in response and closed its eyes. With a wry smile, Dex turned and started walking back toward his camp, the massive bear following behind him, limping slightly but alive. Something told him this adventure was just getting started. As Dex led the wounded bear through the thick jungle, he couldn't help but glance back at it now and then, still trying to wrap his mind around the absurdity of the situation. Here he was, a lone hunter from a backwater sector, guiding a creature that could easily snap him in two with a swipe of its paw. And yet, despite all logic, they were moving together through one of the deadliest places in the galaxy, like two unlikely allies. The jungle was quieter now. The usual cacophony of screeches and howls had died down to an eerie stillness. The fight with the reptilian creature must have scared off most of the local wildlife, or maybe the presence of the bear was enough to keep everything else at bay. Dex wasn't sure which he preferred. He paused at a ridge, taking a moment to get his bearings. The jungle cleared just enough for him to catch sight of his camp in the distance, its faint reflective panels glinting in the fading light. They weren't far, but getting the bear there was another matter. The creature was still limping heavily, and though the serum had helped stabilize it, Dex could tell it wasn't out of the woods yet. Almost there, Dex muttered, mostly to himself. He glanced over at the bear, which let out a soft grunt in response, as though it understood. Maybe it did. Dex was beyond being surprised by anything at this point. They continued down the ridge in silence, the bear occasionally grunting or huffing as it struggled to keep pace. Dex's mind, however, was racing. That reptilian creature, they hadn't even scratched the surface of what it was or why it had attacked. Dex had been on a dozen planets with the guild, seen things that would make most men rethink their careers, but nothing like that. And nothing in the guild's database had prepared him for the sheer size and aggression of that thing. It wasn't a normal predator. No, that thing was sent. But by who? They reached the edge of Dex's camp, just as the last rays of the alien sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the jungle floor. Dex paused at the perimeter, glancing at the containment field he had set up earlier, a protective barrier to keep out unwanted guests. It wouldn't stop something like the bear, but it had worked well enough against the smaller predators. He deactivated the field and motioned for the bear to step inside. The creature hesitated for a moment, sniffing the air cautiously, before finally lumbering through the invisible barrier. Dex couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. He hadn't fully believed the bear would follow him all the way back, but there it was standing in the middle of his camp like some kind of ancient guardian. The bear lowered itself onto the ground with a heavy thud, clearly exhausted. It let out a low growl that sounded almost contented, the tension in its massive body finally easing. "All right, big guy," Dex said, setting down his rifle and retrieving his med kit once more. "Let's see how you're holding up." He knelt beside the bear, scanning the fresh wounds it had sustained during the fight with the reptile. Most of the deeper gashes had started to close, thanks to the serum, but there were still a few nasty scrapes that needed attention. The bear remained still, its massive head resting on the ground, eyes half-lidded but alert. It watched Dex work, the glow from its amber eyes casting faint shadows over the dirt. Dex applied more of the regenerative foam to the worst of the wounds, working methodically but carefully. Despite the strange bond they had formed, he didn't want to push his luck. The creature could still swat him like a fly if it felt threatened. Once he finished patching up the bear's injuries, Dex sat back on his heels, staring at the creature in quiet awe. He'd never seen anything like it. Something about this bear's sheer size, the intelligence in its eyes made him feel like he was dealing with more than just an animal. And then there was the matter of whatever had tried to kill it. His thoughts were interrupted by a crackle from his comm device. Dex Roan's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "You there?" Dex stood up quickly, glancing at the bear to make sure it was still calm before clicking the comm. "Yeah, I'm here. What's going on?" "I've been digging through the planet's wildlife databases, trying to find a match for the creature you described," Roan said, her voice serious. "And I found nothing. Whatever attacked you isn't native to Thalax 7. Hell, it's not listed on any known species database in the Guild's archives." Dex frowned, pacing the camp. "So it was brought here." "That's what I'm thinking," Roan replied. "But that's not the weird part. I intercepted some encrypted chatter on a bounty hunter channel. There's a huge payout for something big on Thalax 7, but it's not for the local wildlife. They're hunting the bear." Dex's heart skipped a beat. "What? Who the hell would put a bounty on a creature like this?" "I'm still trying to figure that out, but whoever's behind it isn't messing around. They've sent off world predators to finish the job things specifically bred to take down targets like your new friend. And that reptile you ran into? It's not the only one." Dex glanced over at the bear, which had shifted slightly in its resting position but was still alert. Its breathing had slowed, but its eyes were watchful, as though it knew the danger wasn't over. "Do you know who's behind this?" Dex asked, his mind racing. "Why would anyone go to this much trouble?" "Not yet," Roan said, her tone frustrated. "But I'm digging. Whoever they are, they've got serious money behind them. They're pulling in resources from all over the system. This isn't just some random trophy hunt, Dex. They want that bear dead and they're willing to burn down half the jungle to do it." Dex cursed under his breath, rubbing the back of his neck. He looked at the bear again, feeling a strange sense of responsibility wash over him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This creature had been targeted, hunted like prey. And now, for better or worse, Dex was caught up in it. "Keep digging," Dex said finally. "I need to know who's behind this and why. If they've got more of those creatures out there, we're in for a fight." "I'll keep you posted," Roan said, her voice softer now. "But be careful, Dex. You're dealing with pros. They won't stop until that bear's dead, and maybe you too." The comm went silent, and Dex clipped it back onto his belt, his jaw tight. He stared out into the jungle, his mind working through the possibilities. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to stop. That reptile had been just one of many, and if the bounty was as high as Roan suggested, more were likely on the way. He glanced back at the bear, which was now watching him with those glowing amber eyes. "Looks like we're in this together now," Dex muttered, giving the bear a wry smile. The bear let out a soft huff in response, almost as if acknowledging the truth of it. Dex grabbed his pulse rifle and checked the power levels. Whatever was coming next, he wasn't going to sit around and wait for it. He moved toward the perimeter of the camp, scanning the jungle with renewed focus. Night was falling fast, and with it, the jungle's deadliest predators would soon be on the prowl. "You know," Dex said quietly, more to himself than the bear, "I didn't sign up for this." The bear snorted softly, as if amused. Dex chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, me neither." The jungle of Thalax 7 was pitch black now, the alien moon, barely visible through the thick canopy of trees. The stars were out, but their faint glow did little to comfort Dex as he stood at the edge of the camp, pulse rifle in hand, scanning the darkness. Every shadow felt alive, every rustling leaf a potential threat. He wasn't sure what would come first, the next predator or the Nexus mercenaries Roan had warned him about. Behind him, the enormous bear rested, its body rising and falling with each slow breath. The creature was far from full strength, but the serum had done its job patching the worst of its wounds. Now the bear's glowing eyes flicked between Dex and the jungle beyond, ever watchful. Dex's thoughts kept circling back to Roan's message. They're hunting the bear. Nexus Corporation. A faceless, ruthless conglomerate known for its dark experiments and illegal bioengineering. If they were involved, this was no ordinary bounty hunt. They didn't just want the bear dead, they wanted it captured. Alive. Dex paced back and forth, running through possible scenarios. He couldn't help but feel like he'd been dropped into something much bigger than a typical hunting mission. Someone had targeted this creature specifically, and they weren't going to stop until they had it. That much was clear. Suddenly, his proximity alarm beeped a soft, warning chirp. Dex froze, his pulse quickening. He glanced toward the edge of the clearing where he'd set up the basic traps earlier, tripwires tied to makeshift explosives, proximity sensors, and motion alarms. Something was moving out there. Here we go, Dex muttered under his breath, gripping his rifle tighter. The bear growled low, sensing the change in the atmosphere. It struggled to rise but managed to stand, muscles tensed, ears twitching as it sniffed the air. The jungle had gone eerily silent, and Dex knew that whatever was coming was big. Out of the trees, 3 figures emerged, moving with the practiced precision of trained mercenaries. Each of them was clad in dark, tactical gear, their faces obscured by visors that glinted in the dim light. They moved in a tight formation, fanning out as they approached the camp, rifles raised. Dex's heart pounded. These weren't random hunters, they were Nexus's private security force, elite, and they weren't here for a negotiation. Dex Torin, the lead figure, called out, stepping forward with an air of authority. His voice was cold, mechanical. You're interfering with Nexus Corporation business. Stand down and we'll let you leave with your life. Dex narrowed his eyes, keeping his pulse rifle trained on the man. Not interested. What do you want with the bear? That's classified, the man replied, his tone flat. All you need to know is that the animal is Nexus property. Step aside or we'll eliminate you. The bear growled, stepping forward, but Dex raised a hand, signaling it to hold back. He didn't want to escalate the situation any further, not yet, anyway. Nexus doesn't own anything on this planet, Dex said, his voice steady. You want the bear, you're going to have to go through me. The lead mercenary sighed, as if tired of the conversation. He raised his hand, signaling to his team. Very well. Eliminate him. In an instant, chaos erupted. The mercenaries opened fire, energy bolts streaking through the air toward Dex's position. He dove behind a fallen log, rolling to the side as the bear roared, charging headlong into the fray. Its massive form barreled into the first mercenary, sending him crashing into the trees with a sickening thud. Dex popped up from cover, squeezing off a burst of shots from his rifle. 2 of the energy bolts struck the second mercenary square in the chest, knocking him off his feet. The third mercenary, a woman, pivoted, firing at the bear, but the creature was too fast. With a powerful swipe, it sent her sprawling into the dirt. The lead mercenary, realizing his team was being torn apart, backed up quickly, shouting into his comm, requesting backup. We've got. He didn't finish his sentence. The bear lunged forward, clamping its massive jaws around his arm. With a vicious shake of its head, it flung the man aside like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard, groaning in pain, his rifle slipping from his grasp. Dex fired another shot, keeping the remaining mercenaries pinned down. The bear roared again, its tusks gleaming in the dim light as it charged toward the last man standing. Before Dex could even react, the bear slammed into the mercenary, sending him flying into the underbrush. The camp fell into a tense silence. The last of the mercenaries lay scattered, groaning and broken. Dex stood slowly, his rifle still trained on the fallen figures, but none of them were getting up to fight. They were done. The bear snorted, pacing around the clearing, its glowing amber eyes locked onto Dex. For the first time since they'd met, Dex felt a sense of mutual understanding pass between them. They had just fought together and won. Dex stepped forward, cautiously approaching the bear. "Well," he said, breathing heavily, "guess we make a decent team." The bear huffed in response, its eyes still watchful but calmer now. It lowered its head slightly, almost in a gesture of acknowledgement. Dex glanced at the remaining mercenaries, all of them injured but alive. He crouched next to one of them, the lead mercenary who had given the order to attack. The man groaned, clutching his side in pain, but his visor had cracked in the fall, revealing bloodshot eyes beneath. "You had your chance," Dex said coldly, leveling his pulse rifle at the man's chest. "Now get out of here. Tell Nexus they're not getting the bear." The mercenary coughed, spitting blood onto the ground. You don't understand," he wheezed. "They won't stop. They'll send more. They'll send everything they've got." "Let them," Dex said, his voice hard. "I'll be waiting." The man staggered to his feet, barely able to stand, and stumbled back into the jungle, leaving his fallen comrades behind. Dex lowered his rifle, glancing at the bear. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, watching him closely. They had won this round, but the mercenary was right. Nexus wasn't going to give up that easily. Roan's voice crackled through the comm, startling him. "Dex? You all right? I saw the whole thing from my end." "Yeah," Dex replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "We're all right, but Nexus isn't going to quit." "I'll keep digging," Roan said, her voice filled with concern. "But you need to be ready. Nexus won't let this go. They're going to come at you harder." Dex looked out into the jungle, his jaw tight. "Let them come," he muttered. "We'll be ready." The camp had settled into an uneasy quiet. Dex paced the perimeter, pulse rifle slung over his shoulder, his mind racing. Nexus wasn't going to stop, and he knew it. The bear, though resting now, was still watchful, its glowing eyes following his every move. Roan had been right. He needed a plan, and fast. The last group of mercenaries had been well equipped, but not the worst Nexus could send. He dealt with enough bounty hunters and corporate hit squads over the years to know that what came next would be far worse. Nexus wouldn't just send more mercs, they'd bring in heavy support. Maybe drones, maybe something worse. He approached the bear, crouching down beside it. The creature huffed softly, clearly exhausted, but its wounds had closed, and it was stronger than before. Dex reached out a hand, hovering it near the bear's head, unsure if the gesture was insane or the only way to show some kind of trust. To his surprise, the bear didn't flinch, didn't growl, it just looked at him, calm and steady. "I'm not leaving you behind," Dex muttered, almost to himself. "If Nexus wants you, there's a reason. They don't get to have you." The bear rumbled low in its chest, a sound that Dex couldn't help but interpret as approval, or maybe he was just projecting. He clicked his comm device, hearing the familiar static as Roan's voice cut through. "Dex, I've got something you're going to want to hear." "I'm listening," Dex said, keeping one eye on the dark jungle. "Nexus has a lot more riding on this than just capturing the bear. I managed to intercept some internal Nexus comms. They've been tracking the bear for years. Apparently. It's part of a bioweapon program. They've been trying to find creatures like it to turn into living weapons. If they can't capture it, they're going to destroy it before anyone else can get their hands on it." Dex clenched his jaw. "Living weapons? You're telling me they've been using this thing as some kind of test subject?" "Not just this one. They've got a whole program dedicated to it," Roan said, her voice grim. "The bear species is one of the few that survived their initial experiments. They need it to complete whatever project they're working on. If they can't get it alive, they'll burn the whole planet down to make sure no one else gets a piece of it." Dex hailed sharply, his mind racing. He looked at the bear again, and the weight of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about survival anymore. The creature wasn't just some random predator, it was something more. Something that Nexus wanted to weaponize. "Then we can't let them get anywhere near it," Dex said, standing up. "How much time do we have before they send the next wave?" "Not long," Roan replied. "They're mobilizing now an assault team with heavy air support. They'll be on you in less than an hour." Dex nodded, already formulating a plan. "Can you intercept their comms again? Maybe buy me some time." "I can try, but it won't last long," Roan said. "You need to get out of there. Now." Dex glanced at the bear. It was stronger, but not strong enough to fight off an entire assault team. They needed to move fast. All right, Dex muttered, grabbing his gear. We're leaving. He crouched next to the bear, patting its side gently. Simon, big guy. We've got to get out of here before Nexus brings the whole damn planet down on us. The bear let out a low growl but rose to its feet, albeit slowly. Dex moved quickly, gathering what supplies he could carry and slinging them over his shoulder. The bear followed him, limping slightly but determined. As they made their way through the jungle, Dex kept an ear on his comms, listening for any sign of Nexus's incoming forces. The jungle was thick, its dense foliage providing some cover, but Dex knew it wouldn't last. If Nexus had air support, they'd spot him from the sky. He needed to find a place to make a stand, or better yet, a way to disappear entirely. They reached a clearing near a cliffside, the ground dropping off into a steep ravine. Dex scanned the area, thinking fast. If they could get down into the ravine, they might be able to lose Nexus's drones in the dense jungle below. It was risky, but it was the best option they had. We're going down, Dex said, glancing at the bear. You think you can handle it? The bear huffed in response, as if to say, lead the way. Dex scrambled down the rocky slope, his boots skidding against loose stones as he descended. The bear followed, slower but steady, using its powerful limbs to navigate the treacherous terrain. Dex kept one hand on the bear's side, guiding it as they moved deeper into the ravine. The jungle closed in around them, the thick canopy above blocking out the moonlight. Dex's pulse quickened. This was good. If they could stay hidden long enough, they might be able to avoid Nexus's assault team altogether. But as they reached the bottom of the ravine, a deafening hum filled the air. Dex's blood ran cold. He looked up and saw the unmistakable shape of Nexus drones flying overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. "They're here," Dex whispered, pulling the bear closer to the thick underbrush. They needed to stay hidden. He crouched low, motioning for the bear to do the same. The creature obliged, its massive form disappearing into the shadows of the jungle. The drones swept over the area, their searchlights passing just inches from where Dex and the bear were hiding. Dex held his breath, hoping they'd pass by without spotting them. Just as he thought they might be safe, a voice crackled through his comm device. "Dex, they know where you are." Roan's voice was frantic. "They're closing in fast, land and air. You need to move now." Dex cursed under his breath. The ravine had given them temporary cover, but it wouldn't last long. Nexus's forces were closing in from all sides. He glanced at the bear. It was still weak, but it wasn't helpless. Dex knew they couldn't outrun the drones forever, but maybe they could fight on their own terms. "All right, Roan," Dex said, his voice steady. "Give me their positions. We're making a stand." Dex's mind raced. He could hear the drones buzzing overhead, and in the distance the unmistakable whine of incoming Nexus hovercrafts. The jungle around him felt suffocating, closing in as the threat grew nearer. He looked at the bear, which was crouched beside him, massive but exhausted. Despite everything, its eyes remained alert, flicking between Dex and the skies above. "All right, Roan, let's hear it," Dex whispered into his comms, eyes scanning the tree line. Roan's voice crackled back, tense but steady. "They've got a perimeter forming around your location. 2 teams coming from the north, a few drones sweeping in from the west, and I'm detecting a large ship moving in from above. You've got maybe 5 minutes before they're right on top of you." Dex bit his lip, mind working through the possibilities. They didn't have time to run. They had to fight, but they needed to fight smart. He quickly checked the remaining power in his pulse rifle. A few rounds left, but not enough to hold off an entire assault team. He glanced at the ravine walls. They were sheer, rocky, and unstable. An idea sparked in his mind. If he could lure the Nexus forces into the ravine, he might be able to trigger a landslide and bury them under the rubble. It was a long shot, but it was the best chance they had. "Roan," Dex said, his voice low. "Can you jam their drones for a few seconds?" "I'll try." "Give me a CC," Roan replied, the sound of rapid typing in the background. Dex looked at the bear. "We're going to have to lure them in. If this works, we can take them down in one hit. If it doesn't, well, let's not think about that." The bear snorted, as if agreeing to the risky plan. Suddenly, the jungle lit up as the searchlights from the drones swept through the treetops, focusing in on their location. Dex's pulse quickened. Roan's voice came through just in time. Jamming now. You've got 10 seconds, go. Dex sprang into action. He fired a single shot into the air, deliberately giving away his position. The drones, momentarily blinded by Roan's jamming, missed their chance to lock on. He could hear the Nexus forces responding immediately, boots pounding through the undergrowth as they converged on the sound of the gunfire. Come on, Dex muttered, sprinting toward the rocky edge of the ravine. Come and get me. The bear, sensing Dex's urgency, followed at a limping run, staying close as they moved. Behind them, the jungle came alive with the sounds of Nexus troops moving and voices barking orders, rifles being raised. The air hummed with tension. Dex reached the edge of the ravine and took cover behind a boulder. He could see the shadows of Nexus mercenaries creeping closer, their dark armor blending with the trees. The hovercraft was almost overhead, its massive engines roaring as it prepared to unleash a barrage of power. Just a little closer, Dex whispered, waiting for the right moment. The first of the Nexus troops appeared at the ridge, weapons raised, eyes scanning the ravine below. They were cautious, but Dex knew they'd push forward soon enough. He just needed to get them in the right spot. The bear crouched beside him, growling low, its body tense. It was ready to fight if it came to that. Dex's hand hovered over a small remote detonator. He had rigged one of the charges earlier, right where the rocks looked weakest. The moment the troops were in range, he'd trigger it. Then, with a deafening roar, the Nexus hovercraft appeared above the tree line, casting a blinding spotlight down into the ravine. Dex's heart raced. This was it, the final push. He waited, sweat dripping down his face as the Nexus forces began their descent, weapons trained on the ravine. Now Dex shouted, slamming his hand down on the detonator. The explosion rocked the ravine with a massive rumble. The ground beneath the Nexus troops gave way, sending rocks and debris cascading down in a deadly landslide. Shouts of surprise and panic echoed through the jungle as the mercenaries were caught in the chaos, their hovercraft veering off course to avoid the falling rocks. Dex ducked, shielding his face as the dust cloud surged over him. He could hear the crashing of boulders and the panicked cries of the Nexus troops as they were buried beneath tons of rubble. The sound of the hovercraft's engines sputtered, and then silence. For a long moment, Dex didn't move, his heart hammering in his chest. The dust slowly settled, revealing the devastation of the landslide. The Nexus forces were nowhere to be seen, buried under the weight of the ravine. Dex stood slowly, blinking through the dust. Roan. "We did it," he said, his voice shaky with relief. There was a pause before Roan's voice crackled back through the comm. "You're telling me that insane plan actually worked?" Dex grinned, wiping the dirt from his face. "Yeah, it did. Barely." The bear stood beside him, panting heavily but unharmed. It had stayed close throughout the chaos, and now, as the danger finally ebbed, it let out a long, low huff of exhaustion. "You earned that rest," Big Guy Dex said, patting the bear's side. The creature lowered itself onto the ground, letting out a deep, satisfied rumble. Roan's voice came through again, this time softer. "I'm picking up some stray signals, but it looks like you got most of them. Nexus is going to know something went wrong, though. They'll be back, maybe not today, but soon." Dex nodded, staring out at the wreckage of the ravine. He knew this wasn't the end. Nexus wasn't the kind of corporation to give up, especially not after losing an asset as valuable as the bear. But for now, they were safe. Dex turned toward the bear, watching as it settled into a resting position, its glowing eyes finally closing. He couldn't help but feel a strange connection to the creature. They had fought together, survived together, and now, it seemed, their fates were intertwined. Roan, Dex said, his voice calm but determined. "I'm taking the bear with me." There was a long silence on the other end of the comm before Roan finally replied. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Yeah," Dex said, glancing back at the massive creature. "Nexus won't stop. If they want this thing so bad, it's because they know it's special. I'm not leaving it here for them to scoop up when I'm gone." Roan sighed. "Well, I can't say I didn't see this coming. You always did have a soft spot for the underdogs." Dex chuckled, already gathering his gear. "Get the sundog ready. We're heading off this rock." As Dex and the bear made their way back through the jungle, the first hints of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the trees. The danger hadn't passed completely, but for the first time, Dex felt a sense of peace. He wasn't alone in this fight anymore. And together they'd be ready for whatever the galaxy threw their way. By the time Dex and the bear reached the ship, the morning sun was rising fully, painting the jungle in shades of gold. The sundog sat nestled between the tall trees, its hull glinting in the early light. Dex walked ahead, motioning for the bear to follow. The creature, limping slightly but still strong, lumbered into the cargo hold without hesitation. Dex stood at the entrance of the ship, taking one last look at the jungle. Nexus would be back, that much was certain, but for now he had bought them some time. He climbed into the cockpit, settling into the pilot's seat with a weary sigh. Roan's voice crackled through the comm once more. Coordinates locked. Where to, Captain? Dex punched in a set of random coordinates, his grin returning. Someplace quiet for a while. We'll figure out the rest later. The engines hummed to life, and the sundog lifted off the jungle floor, rising high into the sky. Dex glanced over his shoulder at the bear, which was resting peacefully in the cargo hold, its enormous form filling the space. Yeah, Dex said softly, as the ship shot through the atmosphere. We'll be ready when they come back. With that, the sundog disappeared into the vastness of space, carrying Dex and the galaxy's deadliest predator toward their next adventure together.